Now's a great time to start talking about the Upper Deck Lorcana lawsuit. I mean, it's not like you can just take $100, file a lawsuit, and just have a dream, right? Oh, you can? You can just file a frivolous lawsuit? We're going to start our journey today looking through Paul Lesko's Twitter. One, because he's a lawyer, and two, because it's actually an interesting and kind of funny read, and he pulls out some good points that I want to start with before we go deeper into some of this lawsuit. He basically starts this Twitter thread out with the Upper Deck versus Ryan Miller and Ravensburger. Anyway, what it's saying is that there's an IP theft where Upper Deck basically created Lorcana, is what they're saying. There's 19 pages here, and this is just a summary, but we'll get deeper into what they're actually talking about. And Upper Deck developed this game called Rush of Icor, and this is the first time most people are hearing about it because before this lawsuit, almost nothing was known about it. And they actually tell us how that game is played in this lawsuit. So we're going to go through that. And here they're just saying that Miller worked on the Rush of Icor game, and he worked on it for about 2 years. He was like a part-time designer. He had some things that he was supposed to do. He did about 5 of them, and then he quit the company. And they're saying Ravensburger, because they were a puzzle board game company, couldn't be able to design a TCG faster than Upper Deck, because Upper Deck even had a 2-year head start on Lorcana. It's kind of funny. Lorcana beat them to even publishing by like 2 years. I find this comment hilarious here, where they say Miller pilfered the game design from Upper Deck that he was paid to create there. The reason I find it funny is because if you go to the definition of pilfered, it says steal things, typically of relatively little value. I think it's a poor choice of wording on the lawyer's part to use pilfered, but yeah, they're saying this game design was stolen. So this is a section Paul pulls out, and it's pretty entertaining because Upper Deck is saying they're a manufacturer of sports cards, trading cards, and Upper Deck successfully sold a multitude of novel games, such as this Verse system, the World of Warcraft trading card game, and Yu-Gi-Oh! And then, and then Paul's looking here saying, "Oh, you really mentioned Yu-Gi-Oh!" And let's pull up this lawsuit here. Upper Deck forced to settle with Konami Digital Entertainment after admitting to counterfeiting hundreds of thousands of Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading cards. So originally, Konami Digital Entertainment was working, and they were working with Upper Deck, and they were licensed by Yu-Gi-Oh! To sell the game in the United States. Well, eventually Upper Deck started supplying the company with fraudulent cards. KDE announced in mid-December 2008 that it would assume responsibility for distribution of the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG outside of Asia. As of the court's recent ruling, KDE's decision was due to Upper Deck's involvement in printing and distributing counterfeit Yu-Gi-Oh! cards. At this point, that's enough overview. Let's go take a look at how they define this game. So down on page 7, we get to the actual overview of the Rush of Icor game. And it says, Rush of Icor is a TCG designed to last approximately an hour. It can be played by one-on-one or multiple players per team without changing the gameplays or mechanics. This could be describing basically any TCG game ever, so I just find it hilarious that that's how they start this. Next, they go on to start talking about building a deck, where each player has to buy the cards from Upper Deck. They then use those purchase cards to strategically build a deck consisting of 40 cards. There can be no more than 3 identical cards in the deck, and you can only contain 2 colors. There are 4 colors: yellow, green, blue, and red. So this is already one similarity between Lorcana, is that you're locked into only 2 colors. The only difference is Lorcana has 6 colors instead of 4 colors. And you're also allowed to use 4 identical cards in a deck and 60 cards in a Lorcana deck. Where here they're using 40 cards and 3 identical cards. But basically every game since Magic uses those same rules. Pokemon uses those same rules, so that's nothing specific to this game either. There are 5 types of cards: champions, which are playable creatures; locations, that are like spells that stay in effect between turns; they have spells that are one-time actions; they have avatars, which are more like, I think, Hearthstone, which represent your player and colors and composition of your deck; and then they have overlays, which are cards that can modify champions, which, that could be like an armor or weapon or something. I don't really know what that is. Those are also basic to basically every card game too, so there's nothing too special there. And then the cards in Rush of Icor contain abilities or keywords. And they have a couple examples here, like support has the ability to provide a friendly champion with extra strength. A card of elusive that can only be attacked by a champion with elusive. There's really nothing special about this elusive ability, because it's basically the same thing as Magic the Gathering's flying, as far as I'm concerned. If a flying creature attacks, another flying creature's the only one that can defend against it. I don't see what's so different about this elusive that no one else could figure this out from anything else. They also have a ability here called Formidable that will destroy the opponent if it faces in battle, if it would lose. Here then they have beginning play, and they take the deck, and they're basically talking about the flavor of this being a game with gods of ancient cultures like Greece or Maya. Start the gameplay, players draw the top 5 cards from their shuffle deck into their hand, so they start with a hand of 5 cards. When it's your turn, a player will draw an additional card to their hand, then they may draw a card face down to place in their influence zone. So this is important. So on your turn, you draw your card, and then you can take a card off the top of your deck and put it in an influence zone. Now, if you've learned anything about Lorcana, they have a similar thing with the Inkwell, and we'll go a little bit more into that in a second. And I was like, well, that's a unique mechanic. So we have this limit to 2 colors, and then we have this influence zone. And if those are really the similarities, maybe that's what they're putting this lawsuit on. Well, there is actually a game that has done this before. Duel Masters has this mechanic where at the start of your turn, after untapping and drawing a card, you may put a card from your hand into your mana zone in order to produce mana. You can put 1 card into your mana zone this way. Cards can also be put in your mana zone with other special cards. You don't have to put a card in your mana zone each turn if you want to, but then you can pay the casting cost from that mana zone, and basically the card just loses all of their abilities and becomes a mana. So that sounds exactly like what the Inkwell is in Lorcana. So let's keep going past this influence zone, because basically they're just telling us how mana works, probably for the jury and the judge, people who don't technically play TCGs all the time, but anyone who's played a board game pretty much understands how that works. Then they talk about the stages of the game. You have a main phase, you have an attack phase, you raid, then champions can use abilities. Players can send champions on raids. Raids last 1 turn, and this is the mechanism where they earn gems or points, basically. This is the lore in Lorcana. Point 44, champions are vulnerable to attacks when raiding, and then they compare strength values. So this is also different than Lorcana. There's a whole bunch of mechanics that are similar, but the real ones that stand out here are the fact that they're raiding. There's an Inkwell. We're limited to 2 colors, and then you're vulnerable to the other player attacking you. But besides that, everything else is just the TCG, right? What they really want you to focus on is that the summon champions, you raid, you attack, and then you retrieve gems. So now we're going to go into Lorcana. And again, it can be played within an hour with one-on-one, multiple players, without major changes to the gameplay mechanics. Then we go into building a deck where you get 60 cards. You can have 4 identical cards. You have to pick 2 of 6 colors: yellow, green, blue, purple, red, or gray. There are 4 card types: characters, items, actions, and songs. So even these are different than the card types that they were talking about in the other game, but they're trying to point out that they're similar enough, which, again, if we put it into Magic, you have creatures, you have artifacts, you have instants. I mean, there's nothing really too different here, right? And even here, they don't actually want to point out the difference between songs. It's just a subtype of actions, but they actually have more mechanics than that going on, so they're leaving some stuff out here. And then Lorcana has abilities and effects or keywords, and they say they're just copy and paste it. For example, Lorcana contains the support ability where they can give friendly characters strength. Magic has that same ability, so I don't understand what the difference is. Some cards contain an ability called evasive, which is the exact same as elusive. Further, some Lorcana abilities have the same effect as formidable, but because Lorcana cards aren't publicly available, Upper Deck can't tell which keywords are the same, and I can tell you the same keywords exist in many other games, so I don't see what's so special about the overlap between their special abilities when they're just using different names. But each player takes the role of a Lumineer. This is just completely flavor, and it doesn't matter to the game at all, so I don't know why they include it. I don't know if they're trying to talk about avatars, though, but this seems to have nothing to do with avatars, so it almost works against them. And then to start the game, players draw 7 cards instead of 5, and then on a player's turn, they can draw an additional card. This is the part where I thought was weird, because I don't think this is how it works. During a player's turn, he'll draw an additional card to their hand and may put it face down to the Inkwell. I think you just play any card from your hand to the Inkwell. You don't have to draw a second card. So I think this is actually a mistake here. The resource basically works the same way. It's ink. It's exactly the same as the Rush of Ichor Influence Zone. It's the same as this mana zone here. So again, It's a mana zone. Yeah, so I went ahead and went to TCG Player instead of looking at the quick action guide. But to put a card in your inkwell, you show the card to your opponent and you place it face down, and then that's all that happens. You don't draw an extra card. I don't know where that came from, but that's actually wrong in the lawsuit. So I'm sure when Ravensburger answers the thing, they're going to start pulling out all these differences because they said it is uncannily similar. I think all these little differences add up. But then after drawing a card, you have a main phase. You have all the phases you'd have in a normal game. You can play abilities, you can attack, you can do whatever. Again, not really any different than any other game. 55 is the point where you send players out to do quests, and then they get lore, and then they can be attacked. So on 56, this is where you can get challenged. But the difference here is instead of comparing strength versus strength, you're comparing their strength versus willpower. And the damage actually accumulates across turns. In the other game, whoever has the highest strength wins. The other card gets banished to the graveyard. Once your willpower's been exceeded by the amount of strength or damage tokens you've received, they go to the graveyard. So they're definitely different mechanics. But to their point, the lore in being challenged is the same mechanic. I will give them that. But that's about all they're running on here. Besides that, they're running on fumes. In point 55, it gets a little funky because they say the currency is lore. You cannot be lost once gained. But there are cards that they've shown, like Aladdin, that do reduce lore. So even that point's wrong, but doesn't really change the point. It's just kind of a moot point anyway, I would say. Then they talk about the core gameplay being summon characters, engaging in quests, challenge, and retrieve lore. They're trying to overly generalize and say that the games are the same. But let's talk more about Ryan. Ryan Miller is the designer in question here. And if we go through his history here, we can see all the games he's been associated with and that he's worked on. He actually worked at Wizards of the Coast. He worked on the Digimon game. He's been working on Lorcana for quite a while. He worked on some Godzilla. You can see here he's worked on Kaiju. He's worked on Magic the Gathering. He's worked on My Hero Academia, Naruto. There's a lot of games here that he's worked on. He's worked on some Star Wars, some Tokyo Ghoul, the Universal Fighting System game. And what's even more interesting is if you actually go back, he actually worked on this game as well. He worked on Duel Masters. It's not listed in this Board Game Geek, but I believe he was also at Wizards of the Coast working on Duel Masters as well. And here in his About section on his webpage, you can see here Wizards of the Coast and R&D for nearly 10 years, left to pursue freelance game design. And before working at Ravensburger, he was considered a freelance game designer. And he designed and launched products, and they all kind of are the same. So what do we do with this? Do we call it the Bring It On lawsuit, where Ryan Miller is just a game designer going around pawning the same thing, just like...
Where the hell is this guy? Listen, we're lucky he's even doing this for us.
Choreographer did in Bring It On, where he just gave the same routine to multiple cheerleading groups so that they all use the same thing. I mean, maybe that's what it is. Maybe he just keeps recycling the same game designs to multiple games. But when I look at the games and kind of in the full context of all the rules, they don't feel the same. All the game mechanics are kind of the same in all the games. It doesn't really matter what you do. There's kind of a limit to what you can do with a trading card game, at least from what I've seen. Obviously, he worked on Digimon, and Digimon feels a whole lot different than these games. But the mechanics Upper Deck picked and the mechanics Lorcana picked all kind of make it seem like a Magic knockoff. I don't know what you do with that. I don't know how you can sue them. And if they win this lawsuit, I don't know how Magic doesn't just sue them for taking their two games and smashing them together. So if it's Magic with Duel Masters Mana Zone, why wouldn't Wizards just sue the crap out of Upper Deck? I don't know what they're going to win here. Ravensburger has time now to answer, and I wanted to point out here that Paul Lesko has some other points since he's an attorney that does this kind of stuff. He said, regardless of what happens, Upper Deck's made a tactical mistake or three. They waited too long to file the lawsuit. They filed it in a state court, giving Ravensburger an easy opportunity to move the case to federal and slow it down, and they did not yet file a motion to basically for an injunction, I believe. And he said he does plaintiff work all the time and has successfully shut down product lines. And if you're going to go that route, you have to work fast. But learning about a copycat project in April and then waiting to June is okay for a regular case, but not in this case. He's saying you would have had to work within the first 2 weeks, not wait a whole month. While Ravensburger, might be in the wrong here, there's probably nothing shutting down the Lorcana game. In the end, I think that this is just it's a lawsuit. It's going to be settled. 95% of these cases, I know some of these lawyers have said, end up getting settled and you never hear what happened. I think that's probably what's going to happen here. I don't really believe there's going to be an injunction stopping Lorcana from actually coming out. I think that'd be kind of ridiculous at this point, and I think it would have to actually happen pretty soon. But I am interested to see what Ravensburger comes out. I think it's going to be juicy, and when they do finally answer, I probably will make another video just like this one. But in the meantime, I would not freak out. I wouldn't change any plans, and I'm hoping we're all playing Lorcana in a couple months. See you guys in the next video.